watching Channel 36, Cable 9 Toronto, CTS, Inspired TV.
Good afternoon and welcome to Rhonda London Live. On the show today, it's been a rough week for Toronto commuters. Some 800,000 of them had to find another way to work when TTC workers walked off the job on Monday. Almost as quickly as it began, the labor dispute is over. Buses and trains are rolling once again. But many of the inconvenienced don't feel especially warm towards unions or the right to strike today. What do you think? Have unions lost their relevancy given the rapidly changing workforce in the 1990s? Should the public be caught in the middle when management and unions clash? Or is the answer even stronger unions that are able to fight bigger battles to ensure Canadian workers have acceptable working conditions and reasonable wages? We'll open the phone lines to take your calls and hear your opinions. Don't go away. We're back right after this. It's over almost as quickly as it began. The TTC is once again on the move to the relief of its 800,000 passengers. But the short-lived transit strike has inflamed many smoldering sentiments on unions and the right to strike. On one hand, there are those who say without unions, we'd be back in the dark ages with lousy wages and intolerable, even dangerous working conditions. On the other hand, there are those who say that unions have outlived their usefulness, especially given the economic realities of the 1990s. With their thoughts on this, I'm joined by Sid Ryan, president of the Canadian Union of Public Employees in Ontario, and he's a general vice president of CUPE National and the Ontario Federation of Labour. I'm also joined by Robert Metz, a founding member of the Freedom Party of Ontario and an opponent of unions. Sid, I'll give you the opening thoughts on this. Is this a tough day to be pro-union? Because there are so many people who are very angry at the situation in Toronto with 800,000 stranded commuters this week.
Actually, it's not. It's no tougher than it is any other day of the year, to be very honest. Always when you get into a strike situation, it inflames people, there's no question about it. But I want to stress that 98% of all collective agreements, and there are literally thousands of them on an annual basis negotiated, only 2% of them end up in a strike. And as has been borne out by this particular strike, they generally last only a couple of days. You'll find very, very few of them last beyond that. The ones that really impact upon the public, such as transportation, are the ones that get people thinking, do we really need unions, or should we take away the right to strike? And I just remind people that we live in a democracy and people have got the right to be able to join organisations and pool their resources, get the best deal. The Pope just very recently came out with a document basically calling for more liberal unionisation rates around the world, because the Pope sees that the rate of unionisation means increasing the standard of living for ordinary working people, and that's the best protection that they have against the market forces that we have at play out there.
Robert, you would say unions have no place in a democracy. You use the exact opposite argument.
I'd go even further. I'd say that unions don't really represent the ordinary working person. In fact, that they are an organization put together to be against the ordinary working person. When a union goes on strike, it's not really striking against the employer. They're striking against all the other unemployed and other people who are employed at lower pay, who might want to take their jobs or would be happy to have a union job if that option was open to them. So that when a union goes on strike, it's really a strike against the marketplace of competitive labor and other people willing to do the same work for less money. And I don't think that that really serves the union members themselves. They're generally pricing themselves out of existence as time goes on because they can't compete with non-union areas. And I think as well that, you know, unions have become over the years more lobby groups and representatives of their members. And you know, we even have the cases in the country now where we've had Supreme Court cases dealing with forced union dues going to various political parties, even though the members may not support them. I mean, I was a member of a union once, but I used the word sparingly because it was a coerced membership. It wasn't a voluntary membership, and until we have voluntary unions, I think that is the thing that we want to change in society, is to make that membership voluntary.
How viable would that be, though?
Well, first let me respond to some of that right-wing drivel we just heard there a second ago.
Right-wing drivel?
Let's talk about it. You know, unions are against ordinary working people. Well, the union I represent, the members I represent, 180,000, who on average earn about $26,000 per year, which boils down to be about $13, $14 per hour. You know, my friend here would love to see people being able to be forced into the global economy and the global marketplace where they have to compete for that job and say, okay, you really only deserve $8 per hour. Is that in anybody's interest to have a whole pool of workers out there, everybody in Ontario, like Alabama, working for $8, $9, $10 per hour? How is that going to raise the standard of living? How is that going to, for instance, how can a family on $8 an hour, which is about $16,000 per year, how can they afford to send their children, for example, to university? How can we get people to break out of the poverty trap? How can we deal with all the problems and societal problems if you have people earning $8 per hour? That's the kind of society that this gentleman here would love to see us take Ontario into. I've got a different vision of Ontario, where people have a decent standard of living, where they can send their children to post-secondary education, where we can raise standards and allow them to participate as productive members inside of society. You can't do it at $8 per hour, and that's the flaw in the right-wing argument.
Well, I have made no such argument. I have not stated who should be paid what, or whether some people should be paid more or less than others. I've just basically saying that a job is a relationship between an employer and an employee. And if someone wants to work and is able and willing to work for less than what you think they should be working for, they should have that right.
But what you're saying is that
but think about what unions do when they go on strike. What do they call labor that wants to walk and cross the picket lines or go and take the jobs? They call them scabs. That to me is not indicative of a movement that cares about those people. They're the social problem. No, the social problem is the unemployed people and the people who are underemployed.
But it's not the unemployed people who are crossing our picket lines. It's management. You see, when you get into a strike situation, and maybe you don't understand the labour relations in the province, employers have the right to lock people out, and they've done it many, many times. Teachers were locked out in this province. There's workers every day of the week get locked out of their workplaces because the employer decides we don't want to pay the extra amount of money.
So why should they have to? Why should they have to?
Because,
for example,
it's a bargaining relationship. When you enter into collective bargaining, the idea is for both parties to be able to sit down and have a negotiated settlement. And what drives the settlement is the ability of the employer to perhaps lock out the workers, or the ability of the workers to withdraw their labour. That's allowed in a free democratic society. It's okay to withdraw your labour. It's not a crime.
But a union person can not only withdraw his labour, because he's a member of a union, he's withdrawing the labor of other people in society too. For example, if I'm the employer and you're the employee, let's say you and I sign a one-year contract and it's fine and it works out till the end, and at the end of the 1 year you decide you want to go on strike because you're not happy with the conditions I offer you. Well, as an employer, I feel that I should have the right to offer those conditions that I'm offering to someone else who's willing to accept them. But that's not the philosophy on which unions operate.
But that's not the law of the land, even, for God's sakes. What are you talking
about? I'm not arguing about the law of the land. I'd like to change the law of the land to something more reasonable.
To say what? Like, that's what you're talking about. It sounds like Nazism, for God's sakes, where you force people to work in slave labour for a certain wage, and if they don't like it, then you can just lock them out and then bring in a whole new batch of workers. That's slave labour. We abolished that in the 1860s.
We abolished coercion, hopefully, way back when, but unions operate on coercion. I mean, membership in a union.
Where's the coercion?
If I want to work for X company and it's unionized, I have to join that union.
No, it's 50% of the employees. A democratic process. You have a vote where you go in, and 50% of the employees, or greater than 50% of the employees, agree to join a union. Then you can go and apply for certification.
Now the issue, I think the issue we're discussing.
Can I finish just one sentence?
Sure.
It's a democratic process, extremely democratic. When we go to the bargaining table and we decide that we don't like the offer from the employer, we're allowed to go out and conduct a vote amongst the membership, and again, it's a democratic vote whether they want to go and work for the wages offered by the employer or they can withdraw their services. Everything about trade unions are completely democratic.
Well,
why are you opposed to that?
Because what rights does the employer have? That's what I'm concerned.
The same rights.
A relationship should be a two-way street. But,
it is a two-way street.
But he does not have the right to hire someone else.
It's the same.
If his current employees indicate that they're unhappy with their job, they're going on strike because they don't like the conditions of the work, which is what we have to assume problem when someone's going on strike. And you know, I have been a member of a union, and I've been a member of non-unions. I mean, in places where there are no unions, which I always preferred to work in. And they didn't pay these slave labor wages you're talking about. I don't know why that argument keeps coming into it. It's like a medieval argument that comes from hundreds of years ago.
Can I jump into this argument here? I think sometimes, though, that the negotiated contracts that are won by unions benefit even non-union shops because it raises the standard of living for everybody.
Well, that's true in any area of the marketplace where people are making money and it's drawing high wages to whatever area. If you're in the electronics industry, like right now, for example, people who are working on the YK2000 problem are being paid exorbitant amounts of money per hour to work and fix on that.
You're talking about highly skilled professional workers who've got post-secondary education in most instances, and there are some plum jobs there for those folks. But you know, you have to recognise that society is not built like that. We have an awful lot of people who drop out of school. We have an awful lot of people with grade 12 education, and we have an awful lot of folks with post-secondary education who cannot break into the marketplace. So there are literally millions of people out there looking for work, and our job is to try and raise their standards of living. And as Ron has indicated, it's demonstrated throughout the history that when you've got unions in a workplace or in an environment or in a province or in a country, that generally speaking the wages and the wage levels of the minimum wage of other folks is raised up by the standards offered by trade unions.
But I would say
is that good for society?
Not necessarily.
Why?
Because, well, you say you want a better standard of living. A better standard of living doesn't mean that all prices must rise and all labor things must rise. It could also mean that prices go down and the cost of living goes down. I mean, theoretically, if we all worked for less, the goods we produce would cost less.
Let's just take an example. Let's just take Mexico. You're telling me where wages are 1/10 of what they are here in Canada, and that somehow they've got a better standard of living in Mexico because wages are low?
No, I'm not saying that at all, and that hasn't been part of my argument.
But just a second ago you said that it maybe if we allowed wages and prices to drop, we'd have a better standard of living. The fact of the matter is, in the third world where wages are only pennies, it's the worst standard of living we've got anywhere in the entire world.
Well, because their pennies in comparison to our dollar can't buy the goods that we produce because they can't afford it.
But if you can produce the goods for pennies in Indonesia or Mexico or anywhere else where we have free trade agreements, why then aren't the standard of living of those folks in those countries being raised to a level that's comparable to what we have here in Canada?
Because the time hasn't passed that it's necessary to pass to have free trade with these countries so that their standard of living will raise. I mean, having a union isn't going to raise your standard of living.
So what is it, the benevolence of the employer? They're just going to automatically wake up?
No, I don't believe anyone's benevolent.
Nike is going to say, we're charging you $200 for a pair of shoes, but by the way, the workers in Indonesia, we're going to give you $10 or $15 an hour. We can make them in Canada for 20. We're going to give you 15. No, go across and check out what Nike is paying their workers in the third world countries.
We have to take a short break, but don't go away. We'll hear more from Sid Ryan and Robert Metz when we come back. Also coming up in our second half hour, vitamin deficiencies. It turns out many of us are not getting enough vitamin C, and that could lead to some serious health problems later on in life. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. Today we're talking about unions. Do they still have relevancy in the 1990s? I'm joined by Sid Ryan of CUPE and Robert Metz from the Freedom Party of Ontario. The number to call is 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. We certainly want to hear your thoughts on this today, particularly in the wake of the TTC strike. Now, Sid, I feel like almost as if I've been on both sides of the equation, because I can remember, now I wasn't around, but I can, from the stories that have been passed down from my grandfather, the days when there was no organized labor, and he used to work on the loading docks in St. John, New Brunswick, and you know, he'd have to get up in the middle of the night, go out middle of winter, freezing cold, and maybe there was only an hour of work and he'd be sent home, and he had a family to support. It was horrible. I mean, it was inhuman what went on. But on the other side of the equation, I see some of the unions, particularly in the television industry, where you think they're more dedicated to promoting mediocrity than promoting excellence.
Well, you know, that goes to the argument, have unions outlived their usefulness, and in today's society, do we need unions? I would put it to you that if we had no unions today, it wouldn't be very long before we slip back into an environment that your grandfather had to work within, where the employers will exploit workers in the workplace, because if they know they don't have an organisation to protect their interests, very quickly you'll begin to see a backsliding in wages, working conditions, health and safety, issues like pensions, which the unions brought us. And by the way, unions brought us the weekend. It was us folks who brought the weekend to people, who lowered the wages from 60 hours a week and 70 hours a week down to 40 hours per week. So very quickly you'll begin to see the standard of hours, the minimum number of hours required to work in a week sliding back up to 44 and 48 and 52 before we know where we are at straight time. So there's an awful lot still to be said for unions. We do keep employers honest. We do keep the wages up for everybody else. So as minimum wages will always have to be raised in order to keep up with the wage settlements that unions negotiate. So I can never see a time when unions won't be useful.
Are unions keeping pace, though, with the fast pace of change in the 1990s?
Oh, I think so. Well, to give you an example, take the Canadian auto workers. There's a real high-tech industry where they pay their workers $22, $23 per hour to work on the lines, but they had about 30,000 members in that industry, and let's say in the Oshawa plant only 15 years ago. Today it's less than 20,000. They've got the best the best product in GM. It's the most profitable plants that they've got. The quality of the vehicles coming off the lines, they say themselves, is beyond, cannot be matched anywhere in the GM empire. So are we keeping pace? Sure we are. We're willing to work with technology, we're willing to work with employers, and at the same time we want to be able to share in the profits and have a decent wage for our people who work in those plants.
I think if you want to share in the profits, you should sign a contract that gives you a portion of those profits, and that if there are losses, you share in the losses as well. You know, wages are sort of a guaranteed profit, whether the company makes a profit or not. They have to be paid, so it places the employee in a totally different situation than an employer. It's the employer who takes the risk, the employer who makes the investment. You talked about the benevolence of employers, you know, like if we took away all the unions, their benevolence would keep the wages high. Wages are not affected by benevolence or the lack of it. They're affected simply by supply and demand. And if there are a lot of people out there who are willing to work for less, that's where the problem is. It's not in the laws and the social system. It's in the fact we have so many unemployed people and people who need jobs or who are willing to move up from their job to a job that might pay half as much as a union.
That argument is nonsense. This one about supply and demand. Let's take a look at where most of the people work in this province. They work a lot, I wouldn't say most, an awful lot of them work in the public sector. How does the law of supply and demand, for instance, come into play in the healthcare system? Where does it come into play in the delivery of social programs, children's aid societies, social programs for children with disabilities? That's nonsense. This question about supply and demand just simply does not operate. You take a plant like General Motors.
Shouldn't it, though?
No, it should not.
Well, there's the issue.
It's got no place for it whatsoever.
So you're saying that that prices should be determined by something other than the real marketplace out there, by some arbitrary union whim.
No, you know, what you're talking about, sorry, is you're talking about.
You can't legislate prices. Let's put it that way.
But you wanted to bring it back to prices. Well, I want to bring it back to.
Well, that's what the wages are.
No,
wages are the price of labor.
No, it's not. It's about the kind of society that you want to live in.
Well, I want to live in a free society.
Yeah, you want to live in a society like the American society. Well, I don't want that. I don't want all the crime that comes with this market-driven economy that you profess all the time. I want a society that says that we are completely different than the United States. Well, you think about it. Where does crime come from? You go back right down to early childhood education.
So you're telling me that
putting money into programs
you're right
in
in
childhood
mind
education.
to be able to have a voluntary contract between us causes crime. That's what causes crime.
You're trying to simplify what I'm saying. What I'm trying to tell you is that if you take if you try to take a look at the market-driven economy and say that's the only wage system we should have in place, I'll say no, that's wrong.
Well, a market-driven economy is a people-driven economy because people are the marketplace.
If it was people-driven economy, it would be about how we treat people as individuals, how we treat our children who are disadvantaged, how we treat the homelessness, for instance, in the city of Toronto. Where's the market-driven economy? Excuse me a second. Let's just back to one.
The issue is not how we treat the least advantaged.
No, let's talk about homelessness. How is the market-driven economy right now helping the homelessness? It's right. It does not work because they took away rent controls. They stopped building social housing and social homes, and as a result of that, what we now find ourselves is we've got 20,000 people living on the streets of Toronto. Where is the market-driven economy that Mike Harris said was going to build this social housing, that a private sector would come in and build it? It hasn't happened.
Well,
now, tell me how you're going to deal with that.
Well, you free up the market. You get rid of rent controls. You get rid of minimum wage. We haven't done that.
They got rid of rent controls.
No, they haven't.
They sure have. And
they phased them out.
And there's more evictions taking place today. It never has happened before. They've stopped building co-op housing, social housing. They've cut back welfare benefits by 22%. Now tell me, how has the market-driven economy put those people in, 20,000 people, into homes?
Well, okay, gentlemen, actually there's a lot of phone calls. Sure. We have so many phone calls. Let's jump in. Paul is standing by very patiently on line 7. Go ahead, Paul. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi there. How are you doing? I've been listening with interest to your conversation this afternoon. And I'm always one who's struck by puns and ironic titles and such. And on that note, I'd just like to point out that Mr. Metz, representing some Freedom Party, certainly seems to be representing to me an extremely false notion of freedom. I think he really is talking about the freedom to enslave, the freedom to reduce the subjectivity, if you like, of human labor to some kind of objective purchased item. I think he's kind of devoid of the notion of the person as a fundamental good with fundamental rights and dignities that really must be respected and acknowledged by law. The fact that, as to the necessity of unions, your key question, they're absolutely fundamental, really, in the face of the type of arguments that Mr. Metz is delivering to us. That's essentially all I have to say. This drive for better price, so-called value, and economistic thinking and reduction of this notion of human labor to this other commodity item is exactly why unions are necessary to protect the dignity of human work and experience.
The dignity of human work and the dignity of a human being comes from being able to have freedom of choice and have freedom in a society and accept the responsibility for those things. I don't think that there's anything that I've said that would take that away. I'm saying that any kind of a labor, or rather an employee-employer relationship, should be voluntary on both parts. That both parties to that agreement should be able to say no and walk away from the table and not have to do anything with each other.
But is it not voluntary, though? Because management, union representatives get together every 2 or 3 years through the life of the contract, and they hammer out a deal, and they both agree to it. Is that not voluntary?
See, my father used to be in the construction business, and he used to run a non-union company and a union company. The union company was out of work most of the time because they priced themselves out of the labor market, and the non-union company was working all of the time. And it just basically, you know, you can't say that one person was being treated worse or better than the other person. They chose to be where they are, where the opportunities are.
Okay, and I appreciate that you may have had some family history with unions, and that may be what's driving your agenda here. But the fact of the matter is, you've got 1/3 of the workforce in Ontario and 1/3 of the workforce across Canada is unionised. But I want to come back to the question of homelessness.
Would you support voluntary unions?
Voluntary unions, we are voluntary unions.
No. I mean, if I go work at a unionised company, should I be allowed not to join that union?
No, listen, because what happens, the law has already looked at this question, and what they've said.
But we're looking at it again right now.
No, we're not. What we've said, what we have said is in the workplace, and judges have said in this country, that if you belong to a workplace that's unionized and you want to benefit by the collective bargaining of that union, where they bring in better wages, better working conditions, better pension plans, and better health benefits, well, then you should be prepared to pay for that as well as the workers.
And you should join the union.
And you should join the union, and that's what the law of the land is.
But if you don't want to join the union, you should be able to not join the union and not share in those things and make your own deal, shouldn't you?
No, that's
why not?
Where's my dignity to make my own deal? I want to make my own deal.
Gentlemen, I have to take a commercial break. We will expand on that point, I promise. Don't go away. We're back right after this. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. We're talking to Sid Ryan from CUPE, and I'm also joined by Robert Metz from the Freedom Party. Let's go to Leah on line 5. Go ahead, Leah. You're on the air.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Hi, Leah.
Hi. I agree with Mr. Metz. I think that the unions are not relevant now. They've become far too powerful and politicized, and they are hurting the economy drastically.
Okay, Leah, that's an interesting point. And Sid, I know a lot of people who feel that way. I would question, though, whether unions are actually too powerful in the 1990s, because I can remember it wasn't that long ago when unions would negotiate contracts, and let's say a 3-year contract, you'd get an increase of 7%, maybe 5%, and then 6% in the 3rd year of the contract. Now you see contracts being negotiated that are 2, 0, and 2. I mean, and that's not even inflation.
It's not. That's right. There's all this nonsense out there about unions being powerful. really, that's stories been spread by the Premier of the province who likes to be able to run against the unions in the next election, as opposed to running on his record and running against the opposition parties. If unions were all that powerful, we would be getting negotiated settlements of 7, 8, 9, 10%. In fact, we're not. We're getting the rate of inflation plus maybe 0.5%, and that's only happening this year. For the last 7 years, we haven't had wage increases. Most of these workers have actually been tightening their belts, and much has been asked to by governments and by employers, and we have not been keeping pace with the rate of inflation. The thing about what gives the unions the impression that we're powerful is that we're organised, that we're called organised labour, and we're able to mount challenges against bad legislation that the government will bring in, and we organise our people to be able to vocally express their opinions, and that's what gives the impression that we're very powerful. And of course, it's a convenient scapegoat for people like the Premier, who like to demonise unions, refer to us as union bosses, as if somehow there's something illegal about the business that we're involved in.
I can't see, Sid, how you can say you're not powerful. Unions have the right to strike. Private labor and people who aren't unionized don't have that right, and they don't have that power. So in effect, you're a whole separate class of labor. And really, you know, if you always look at union versus non-union, union labor is elite labor. It's not labor for the little guy or the guy at minimum wage or thereabouts.
That's a good point. So let's take a look at it. I represent, as I said, 180,000 members. 20,000 of them work in...
yeah, but none of them join voluntarily.
20,000 of them work in the hospital sector. They clean floors. They clean bedpans, they change diapers on the senior citizens in our hospitals, they make food in the kitchens of our institutions, whether it be universities, schools, or hospitals. The point is, you said they were not ordinary people. Do you not think they're ordinary people? That they're not the little guy in the system? Do you think they're big fat cats? These people who clean the floors?
I said that they have the right to go on strike, and that other people do not.
You said they're an elite band of workers in the province. You call those people elitist?
No,
those who work and clean the floors and change diapers of senior citizens?
I said unions are powerful. Unions have a right to call a strike, even when their members don't really want it.
So all these workers then who clean the floors and clean the bedpans, they shouldn't be allowed somehow to get together and to increase their power in the workplace? Is that something abhorrent that you find?
Not as long as they did it voluntarily and through persuasion, not through force, not through the force of calling a strike and keeping other people away from their job.
If you don't want a union, there's a process in the law that says all you have to do is take a simple vote between themselves, and the majority vote will say we don't want a union. The union's out of there.
But if I'm working for a company, I don't want my wages and my job security to be determined by some other people voting. That's not the way it works.
But you said it's not democratic. If you don't like the union that you're involved in, you simply just have to get together, have a vote, and get the union out of there.
Oh, it's not that simple.
What about the individual, though, who does not want to belong to a union? And I know there are some people with religious affiliations, just based on the religious beliefs, who cannot.
Well, what happened about 40 years ago? There was a very famous strike, I guess you could say, in the province of Ontario. And it was based on that principle. The employer was wanting to allow everybody who belonged to the union to opt out, and the union took it to court, and there was an arbitrated settlement, and eventually a judge called Judge Rand brought in what they call the Rand formula. And what it actually means, if you belong to a trade union, and that trade union negotiates with the employer, and they negotiate to improve the benefits, wages, pension plans, health care, eyeglasses, dental, etc., that all of those benefits, if the employee in the workplace receives those benefits, they should be expected to pay the same rate of pay as the union does as everybody else in the workplace who decided to voluntarily participate. If they don't want to participate in the union, nobody's forcing them to participate in the union.
Based on religious beliefs.
But they do have to pay the 2%, or wherever the due structure is. In some cases it's only 1%. But they do have to pay that because they are benefiting by the work of the union and by the membership involved.
But by virtue of the fact that they have to pay that, they are a forced member. Whether you can say, you know, euphemistically, you're not a member because you don't have to have any voting privileges. So all you're saying is that if you don't want to be a member of a union, we'll take your money from you, but you can't vote. That's not a membership of anything, as far as I'm concerned.
There's nobody denied a vote anywhere in the labour movement. Whether you agree or disagree with the union, you still get a vote. So don't spin those stories out.
Well, then there's no such thing then as a non-union person working in a union shop, so to speak.
If enough people in a workplace decide that they don't want a union, the simple process is to initiate the process where you have a vote to say we want the union to be decertified.
But what if one person decides they don't want to be in a union, or two or three, and they're not a majority, but they don't want to be any part of the union? Don't they have that right? Where's their dignity to have their freedom of association, which is guaranteed them under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
That's like turning around and saying that if I object to my taxes coming off of my payroll, that I should be able to go in.
Hey, I should be
able to go in and say, I want to opt out of society here. I don't want any part of your healthcare system. Let me opt out. Don't be so silly. That society doesn't work like that.
Well, I want to give that a try, actually. Let's
There's
go
an
to
irony
Bill.
in that thing.
Let's go to Bill on line 1. Go ahead, Bill. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi, Bill. Go ahead.
I'd like to know what dignity there is in working in agencies and working for contracts without benefits, without anything, all right, for $7, $8 an hour. I think if you want to work in a unionized house, you should pay the dues, because we've been out the door to get those wages. Management gets the same wages when we come back in, all right? We up their wages for them, but we got to bite the bullet. And then they bring in third party. They say they're downsizing. All right, so we're humble. So we go back 10 years, all right? And then they end up, all right, we go back 10 years, and then we're humble. Then they end up shutting down the place, moving around the corner, shaking off all the responsibility to get this cheap labor for the stockholders. So the only people that are benefiting is the big top, the guys that hold the stocks and shares.
Okay, Bill, thank you.
That's a great point the caller is making. Take a look at the Bell Canada strike right now. Here we've got some Bell Canada operators who've worked in this company for 35 years, gave the company major concessions over the last number of years to be able to keep their jobs. The thanks now that they're getting for giving those concessions is the employers turning around. This is a private sector employer, by the way, turning around now and saying we're going to sell those jobs off to Arizona. That's why we have a strike. We've got thousands of workers out on the picket lines.
It was also a private sector employee
saying that we gave these benefits, and at the time the company said, help us out. We're in dire financial straits, help us out. So they gave concessions, the workers did. Now the company made over $1 billion in profits last year, and the greedy so-and-sos won't even turn around and share the profits with the workers. Instead, they're saying the thanks for that is we're going to get rid of 2,000 jobs, most of them women, by the way, whose jobs are given away down into the United States. That's
whether an employer makes a lot of money or loses money or anything has nothing to do with wages. What you agree to work for is what you agree to work for, and you're not entitled to anything more.
That's called collective bargaining, but I thought you were against that. A few moments ago you just told me.
Well, that's called individual bargaining.
A few moments ago you just told me what share in the profits. So now you're telling me the profits that the employer makes is of no consequence, and what we should be doing is negotiating a wage. So that's called collective bargaining. So are you either for collective bargaining or are you against it? So are you for unions or are you against them? You can't make up your mind here today.
You're saying there's no such thing as individual bargaining? That if I make a deal with one employer, that's called collective bargaining? Come on.
So now 20,000 GM workers are going, or 20,000 hospital workers on an individual basis are going to go in and negotiate a separate collective agreement with the employer? It's nonsense.
No, there could be a lot of practical reasons to have a union, as long as people can voluntarily join it, which most of them would if they felt there was a benefit. We're making progress here today.
Now you're saying there's some practical reasons why we should have unions. You're coming around.
I have nothing against unions.
If we stay here long enough, you're going to be a big supporter of trade unions.
Okay.
Voluntary
we can't stay here any longer. We have to take a commercial break, but we will be back and take more of your calls right after this. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. Today we're talking about the relevancy of unions in the 1990s. I'm joined by Sid Ryan from CUPE and Robert Metz from the Freedom Party. Let's go to Sandra online too. Go ahead, Sandra. You're on the air.
Rhonda.
Hi, Sandra.
My name's Sandra Crawford, and I am the Ontario Regional Rep for the Organization of Rural Route Mail Carriers. I currently am for unions 100%. Reason being is we absolutely have no bargaining powers whatsoever when it's time to negotiate our contracts. There's people that are there for 20 years and have to worry 6 months before their contracts are due whether they're going to get that contract back. We have no benefits. We have absolutely no rights whatsoever. We pay all our own expenses, and some of us are doing it for less than minimum wage. And as far as I'm concerned, if there was a union behind us, then we would have that much more fighting rights. And currently we have roughly, I can't remember the exact amount, but we are a majority of people that have signed a card to join our own union and become one. And that's exactly what we need. We have to become one to have all those bargaining rights, to be part of a union. Like, we have absolutely nothing. If we need a day off, we have to hire somebody to come in and do our mail route for us and pay that out of our own pocket once again.
Okay.
Now, Sandra, why would you say that your union has no bargaining power? Why would you make that statement?
We are not a union. We don't have. We are all individuals.
So, but why really don't you have the bargaining power even as an individual? Is it because there's so many other people out there willing to do this job, and therefore your employer doesn't want to pay?
There is strength in numbers.
Can I give you an
Individually,
example?
a person doesn't have much.
Well, this is a great example.
But
the work here that this woman is talking about, in fact, was unionized at one stage. Canada Post contracted this work out about 2 years ago. And they got rid of all of the unionized workers in the workforce that did these rural routes. And now we have exactly what Robert is talking about. You've got these individualized workers trying to negotiate with the employer, and as we're hearing, they've got terrible conditions, terrible wages, terrible benefits, and now they themselves are recognizing that they need to become unionized once again.
But the issue
so they're
is
going out now and going to get themselves unionized so they can negotiate.
When somebody accepts a job that they admit has terrible conditions and stuff, I have to assume that the reason they took it was that whatever they had before was worse. I have to assume that, because it's either they were unemployed.
That these people then remain mired in poverty?
No,
just because
I'm just saying that if you arbitrarily,
not as good as the one they've got
if
now.
you arbitrarily raise the wages of this service, you're not going to do anybody any good. You're probably going to get rid of the job. It won't exist anymore, and then there won't be any job to argue about.
We know the work has got to be done, because one thing we know about the business community is they always want to make a profit, and if the price go up because wages go up, well then so be it. Then then
there's no problem.
Well, no, there will be.
As long as there's people willing to do the job, there's no problem.
In this particular instance, what's happening is the corporation wants to make more money out of it, and they're squeezing more money out of the system by paying poverty-level wages. And this woman is testimony to that. She's telling us the wages, the conditions. She has to find a replacement worker, and she has to pay the replacement worker if she goes off sick. If there's a family problem,
that's the same kind of issues a businessman or a retailer has to deal with every day of the week.
That's the kind of society that you want. That's not the kind of society that I want. That this caller wants, and the vast majority of people don't want this kind of society.
I have no power over wanting any kind of society. It's the kind of society there is. Prices and wages and an exchange of this exists. It's not something to advocate.
It's something that you're trying
to
promote. It hasn't existed in Canada, because that's exactly the model they have down in the United States, and we've made a conscious decision when our forefathers constructed their constitution. They said we don't want to look like the United States. We want to have a country that's built
like the United States.
We got
Why do you
social
keep bringing
programs
up the United States?
Because that's the model that you keep espousing. You may not understand that, but that's the model that came from
the United States
Thatcher, and it came from Ronald Reagan.
Screwed up as Canada. They have unions. They have the same labor problem.
I need to take some more phone calls. Let's go to Bill on line 8. Go ahead, Bill. You're on the air.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Hi, Bill. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Over the years, I've been involved in several unions. One of them I was involved with the government from Crown Corporation from 1979 to 89. Basically, we had no right to strike, so we had no power. They kept up with our wage requirements as far as things were going, as far as the cost of living, but just barely. So basically, it ended up bumping us into another tax bracket every time we got a raise. We ended up taking home less take-home pay. Now, to get away from the Crown Corporation unions, I left the Crown Corporation. I've become a mechanical trades person, and I belong to a mechanical trades union. At the present time, I've been involved with this local for over 4.5 years, and I've got 7 months' worth of employment out of them. I've worked in the non-union sector. Basically what it seems to come down to is whether I work in the non-union sector or whether I work in the union sector, I'm getting screwed in both directions. The non-union sector saying, sure, we'll match your wage requirements because they demand my skills. The union sector is basically saying, well, we don't want you, or they don't come right out and say that we don't want you, but, belonging to a union for 4.5 years, which is a fairly powerful union, and only having 7 months worth of work, it doesn't reflect, in my opinion, very well upon unions.
Okay, Bill, I'm going to have to stop you there. We have so many callers. Let's go to Norm on line 4. Go ahead, Norm. You're on the air.
Yes, my concern is about the excessively high rate of union dues. The purpose of union dues is to pay for unions to negotiate contracts and to manage those contracts. However, millions of dollars are used for political purposes. Recently in downtown Hamilton, major real estate properties have been bought with union dues. And I feel that, for example, the transit strike in Toronto, the extra 1% that is wanted, if it came from unions in reduced dues, this would be an equitable settlement, I think, to the overall community.
Norm, I'm going to stop you there, and thank you for your phone call, because he brings up an interesting point. In this era where we are seeing union contracts negotiated for 2, 0, and 2, does it make sense to be paying 2% of everything that you make in union dues?
Yeah, okay, well, first
up to 2%.
Okay,
I
yeah,
should
up
say.
to 2%, because an awful lot of locals don't charge 2%. Well, what you have to look at is what are the benefits you've got in your collective agreement. It isn't necessarily what did you negotiate today. Collective agreements are built over a period of time, maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 years. You've got to look at, do you have a good pension plan? Do you have job security? Do you have seniority? Do you have good wages, better wages than you would in the private sector? Obviously, you have better wages because we're hearing $8, $9, $10 an hour is the norm in the private sector. That's not the norm in the unionized sector. And so all of those benefits come as a package, and that's what you have to take a look at and say, okay, what is this 2% per week or per month that I'm paying into my union? What is it worth to me at the end of the day? If I pay $300 per year in union dues, do I get better than $300 per year back over those workers in the private sector? And the obviously answer to that is surely you do. You got better pensions, benefits and wages. You don't get them in the private sector.
And
so
you get higher
that 2%
taxes
is worth thousands of dollars to you in your back pocket. And yet so you pay higher taxes. But believe me, somebody would rather be taking home $35,000 per year and pay the taxes on it than be taking home $15,000 a year.
Hang on a sec here. You know, if you wanted to do something useful as a union leader, you know what you could be doing for the labor in this province and in this country? Fighting for lower taxes. Fight for a higher tax exemption rate. It shouldn't be like, you know, your minimum, you shouldn't be paying taxes on anything you make before $20,000 a year. But the problem is the kinds of issues that unions support are the kinds of issues that governments have to tax your labor for. That's why they're paying 52% taxes.
I'm going to raise it. So let's talk about taxes. So Mike Harris came in the last election, supported by people like you, saying
supported by me.
Lower taxes. So what
I said
people like you who advocate lower taxes. So as a result of those taxes, he had to borrow $4 billion, by the way, to give people a tax break. Having borrowed that money, he then proceeded to take $800 million out of hospitals, which has now basically crippled our healthcare system. He take education, $1.5 billion out of education, which he's crippled the education system. Children had 500,000 children in this province had their benefits cut by 22%.
You can't pull the plug on those services without opening them up to the marketplace.
Out of the mouths of young children in this province by the welfare cuts. All of that to pay for your tax breaks. And you want me to go out and say, give us more of this, Mike?
Well, first
close down more of our hospitals, leave more children with any food on the table?
Lower taxes, ironically, create more revenue for the government, as the Harris government has discovered.
So why then is the healthcare system messed up?
Because the healthcare system's run by the government and the education system's run by the government.
They should be both. That's a simplistic answer. It's been run by the government for the past 50 years, and we haven't seen hospitals closing, and we haven't seen emergency departments.
Well, it took 50 years for the credit card to run out. That's all
we're going to have to stop it there. I don't think we're going to settle this debate today at any rate. Robert Metz, Sid Ryan, our time is gone, but thank you both for joining us today on the show. You both brought up some really interesting points. And don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these messages. Stay tuned.